Hello everybody, welcome to our pre-accelerator program session 5. We're here in the 28th floor of the Guy's Hospital wing with Matthew Durdy and Ruff to talk about money and finance in investing into tissue engineering, regenerative medicine startups. So the agenda today, we will start off with Matthew Durdy, who is Chief Business Officer of the Cell and Gene Therapy Catapult, government-funded institution I'm sure you're all very well familiar with. But then we'll move on to Ruff, who has just finished her fantastic MBA and is now a very qualified consultant in the translational life sciences sector. Then we'll move on to have a bit of a panel discussion, bringing into discussion some of the issues that were raised during the talk. We'll be addressing some more of your questions during that time. And if you come up with anything that you'd like to ask during the course of the presentation, please pop them into the chat box on the webinar panel, and we will extend them over to our speakers. Okay, so Matthew Durdy will be our first speaker today. As I mentioned, he's CBO at the Cell Therapy Catapult. For those of you who don't know the Catapult, and I'm sure there are very few, this is a government-funded initiative to accelerate the cell and gene therapy industry in the UK. They're building a massive new manufacturing centre in Stevenage, and they are an ideal source of advice for any cell or gene therapy company who are trying to develop in the UK. Our second speaker, Dr. Ruff, as I mentioned, is an MBA qualified consultant, specializing in the commercialization and translational research of life sciences and regenerative medicine and neuroscience specifically. So now we will move on to Matthew's talk. All right. Thank you, Matthew.
Okay, well, welcome everybody, and thank you for listening in. I was asked to talk basically about valuation, transactions, fundraising, and the likes. And what I would like to do is start at the beginning of that discussion, really, which is about turning a good scientific idea into a proposition that describes the value. Because ultimately, everything that cascades down in terms of the transaction and the funding and the fundraising has to start with a proposition of value that people get and understand. And the quicker they get it, the quicker they understand it, and the clearer it is, the more value you will be able to secure for yourself in that relationship. And I'm not sure whether it was mentioned in the introduction, but I've spent some time teaching at the University of Chicago Business School, actually on their Global New Ventures Challenge. And I've also been a venture capitalist, and I've also raised funds. And this little collection of 5 points is a distillation of that experience, which every time I've played it on professionals, they just go, yep, that's what we're looking for. So I'm going to take you through those points one by one. And those points are ensuring that there is a need that can be easily understood and described, making sure that you've got a product that meets that need, that whatever you've created, you have a long-term advantage that you're able to exploit, that actually you're going to be able to deliver on whatever it is that your proposition is, and then some understanding that you need to communicate to those around you about the key elements of the plan. And the first thing I would emphasize in this set of points is that in your first interactions with anybody about describing the value of your business, the one thing that you're not doing is giving them your business plan. And the second thing you're not doing is you're not telling them about the fantastic science that you're developing. They're important, but they're not the first things that people need to know to get them on side. You need to get those people on side to start with. So let's just talk about need for a second here. What do I mean by need? What need is that ultimately you're developing a commercial proposition, and for that commercial proposition to be successful, it's not that you should be out there trying to convince people that it is something that they want. It is that you should be out there exposing them to the availability of something that you have and that it meets a need that they either already know they have or didn't know they have, but it quite quickly realise that they do have once you actually start talking to them. And it's quite important that that need is clearly expressed and that you're actually addressing an audience that wants to talk to you, an audience that is actually interested in what you're doing. If you're standing on a plinth talking about something that actually they're not in the slightest bit interested in, you're off to a non-starter. Okay, you're making life too difficult. What you really want to be doing is talking to an audience that and this slide exemplifies it for me, is what I describe as the screaming need. Okay, they are just so passionate about there is something there that they know they want. And now let me try and exemplify that from our sector. So if you have a new product which is let's say it's in the cardiac space and it makes a marginal improvement in left ventricular output or something like that, sure, it's a healthcare benefit. It's an improvement for the patient, but it's probably not transformational for the patient. So if you can provide it to them very, very cheaply and very, very easily, and we'll come on to those aspects later, then it might be something that's a viable product. But actually, if they're going to be difficulties, if they're going to be barriers in the way of trying to get that product into the marketplace, it's not a strong enough need. A contrasting need might be something in oncology, for instance, an unmet cancer, where actually a patient has failed 3 courses of treatment and the next option is actually palliative care. If you've got a product that meets that need, you've got clinicians, you've got payers, and you've got the hospital all saying, we need something here, we need something that's going to fill that gap. It's a clear need, it's a need that's being very clearly expressed, and it's something that you can communicate to other people. So think about your own opportunity and what you're going forward and how you pull out the need that is most clearly expressed and strongly expressed. And it is I stress a function of 2 things. It is about the size of that need and the quantity of that need. So you may have a massive need in say a rare disease, but actually not very many people with that rare disease. So the 2 work together. If you end up with a very small benefit in a very small area, then obviously you're limited in the size of the proposition that you're trying to put forward to others. And I think I'm not going to dwell on this slide here. Hopefully you're going to be able to read these slides at your leisure. But the point that I'm trying to make here is when you are talking about need, is you need to think about the person whose need it is, or the organisation whose need it is you're trying to describe. And unfortunately in healthcare, that's not one person. There are multiple layers of people with a need. And the best products will meet all of the needs of all of the layers. So just to quickly exemplify it here, you've got the patient. The patient needs a treatment. And they need to, so that's the beginning of the process. But actually you need a clinician who's going to recommend that treatment to the patient. But even that's not enough, because the healthcare provider somewhere along the way has to have a hospital system or whatever it might be that makes that treatment work within that environment in some way, shape or form. And then ultimately somebody's got to pay for it. And that may or may not be the hospital system, or it might be a separate system as an insurance system like you'd have in the US. And you've got to think about all of those different aspects in terms of describing the need that comes with your product. Given the limited time, I'm going to move now on to the next section, which is really about product. And the point about product is you can't work out what your product is until you have done the need section analysis, because it's not driven by the science, it's not driven by your invention, it's driven by the fit between your invention and the need that is out there. And product is a general business term, but obviously when we talk about product, we could be talking about services, we could be talking about drug, we could be talking about many, many different things. But the important thing is to make sure that whatever it is, the way that you construct the product that is at the heart of your business is actually meeting that need very, very clearly. That the people that you're approaching are able to see a clear link between a screaming need and an offering that you're making. There's an example here, actually, that's drawn from the CAR T space, or the T-cell space. And this is how, again, we haven't got the time or the space here to go into the detail of this, but the point that I'm trying to make with this rather complex slide is that it's not just about what's in the bottle or the bag or whatever it might be. There are multiple layers to this proposition, each one of which is designed in some way to meet the needs that were described or analysed in the needs section. So there is what's in the bag, and you know, that might be a CAR T therapy targeted at a particular type of cancer. But in order for that to be used in the hospital setting by clinicians, you obviously need a load of data. You need clinical trial data. You need good manufacturing. It needs to be approved from a regulatory point of view. That's all part of the product. It's useless without it. But often that's not sufficient, particularly with a groundbreaking product. If you've got something that really is going to change the dynamic, you hope is going to change the dynamics of healthcare and make a product that is really going to change the lives of patients and also generate income and wealth, then often you're changing the system. So you've got to make sure that everything that you're doing within your company works towards facilitating that change of the system. You may need to provide economic data and you may provide a particular pricing mechanism that works, that allows payers to pay. For instance, if you come along with a curative drug and you come along and say, this is a curative drug, it's going to save you £5 million worth of healthcare costs over the 20-year life of the patient, but I want you to pay £1 million for that drug. You've got to work out how the healthcare system is going to be able to pay you £1 million. And that might actually mean that you have to spread those payments over a number of years, but you've got to have that all set up and ready to facilitate the adoption of the product as time goes forward. So the third aspect of all of that is, okay, so you've developed this fantastic understanding of the need. You've developed a product that meets and matches that need, and you've created an economic advantage for yourself. Then you need to be able to communicate in terms of your value proposition how long you're going to be able to take advantage of that lead. What is it about what you've put together that allows you to believe that it will be commercially exploitable for a long period of time? Because that's what the investors, the people that are going to be talking to about value, are interested in, because you want them to make a commitment to you, and you've got to explain to them how you're going to return to them the value in some way, shape or form, and how robust your case is. And this is very often when we get to this section of the discussion, people start focusing on patents. Patents is only one part of the story. It's a subsection of intellectual property, and intellectual property is extremely important. Patents are important. There are many other forms of intellectual property. There is know-how that's extremely important. And the more complex your product, from the previous section, it might be part of the defensibility story. If you need to have an intricate system of delivery and manufacturing and quality control in order to deliver these products, it's going to be quite hard for somebody else to come along and say, oh, well, I'll do that. That looks like a good business. All of that needs to be built into the story that you explain to investors about why you're going to be able to make money out of this for a long period of time, or a reasonably long period of time. Other aspects of that might be, follow-on products that maintain the defensibility over a longer period of time. Now, having caught the attention of the investor, and when I talk about investors, I'm not just talking about financial investors. If you're trying to set up a business and get it going, you need lots of people to buy into what you're doing. You need people around you to come and work with you. They are investors in your business. They're going to invest their time, their lives into what you're doing. Sometimes you're going to try and convince a healthcare system that they need to take on your product and give it a go. They're making an investment when they do that. So you've caught the attention. You've shown them that there's a big need for what it is that you want to do, that you've come up with a brilliant idea that meets that need, and you've structured that idea in such a way, and you've gathered together the advantage that means you're going to exploit it for a long period of time. The next question they're going to ask is, okay, so how are you going to do it? Who's going to do it? Have you got a team there that is going to deliver this proposition? And this is fundamental. When you talk to venture capitalists, they will often start with team. They'll often say management. That's all that really matters. and part of the philosophy behind that is we don't know whether the idea is going to work. We don't know whether the science is going to work, okay? But we know that a bad team will mess it up, and therefore it won't work. Flip side is it might not work for technical reasons or scientific reasons, but a good team will adapt, move on to something else, and we can still back them and still retain some of the value of what we've been doing. And the sorts of things that you need to be starting to communicate to people is about the functionality of that team. How well do they work together? How deep is their experience? How have they reached out and created a network that gives them experience of working together, working with other people, that convince you that if the task in front of them is presented, they will deliver on it. And that's not just about the people themselves, including this team thing. I would say, the scientific institutions that you need to work with on that, the manufacturing partnerships that you might have in place, the marketing partnerships you might have in place for all of that. All of that is part of the team that gives people a sense that actually this prospect is going to be delivered. All of these things are necessary, and it is not sufficient just to have one or two of them. You need all five of them. And then the last part of the proposition that I was going to put across in terms of the 5 key points, and I stress it's 5 key points that if you can't answer them all, or you find yourself fudging on one of the answers, stop, reevaluate what you're doing, correct the problem, or just don't proceed. It sounds brutal, but I've seen too many people waste large chunks of their life convincing themselves that they have answers to these things when they haven't really made them coherent. The last part of it is plan, and unfortunately that's a bit of a generalization, but it's what the investors are looking for is a sense of what you're going to do with the resources you're asking for from them. Now, they are also trying to get a sense of what the journey is going to be like. Is it going to be an easy ride? Are they going to be enjoying this, or is it going to be terrifying? Are they going to have to step in to make sure this journey gets finished because the plan is inadequate? Or is it actually just going to be something that they can sit back and watch and enjoy the fruits of? And there are many different aspects of this, but particularly in the context of healthcare, you've got, it's not sufficient just to have a scientific development plan. It's not sufficient just to have a clinical plan. You've got to explain in the field of cell and gene therapies how the manufacturing and business model is going to work. You've got to be able to explain how the reimbursement is going to work. How is it going to fit into the hospital system? All of these things that you're not going to be able to describe the entirety and the depth of it, but you need to prepare yourself to get across to the investors a way in which they believe that these things are going to be delivered simply and that you've thought them all through. And just as an example, really as a finishing slide for me, this is really just to make the point that there is no single answer. In the cell and gene therapy space, you often get people talking about allogeneic products versus autologous products, but actually the discussion is much more basic than that and much more undeveloped. So it's not about you picking a particular model and saying we're going to follow that route. It's about making sure that all of the aspects of what you're doing in your plan are consistent with the product that you said you were going to deliver to meet a need that is extremely large. And it could be at one end of the spectrum, using the slides in front of you now, at one end of the spectrum, a product like GSK's Strimvelis, where in fact the complexity of the underlying therapeutic and the nature of the follow-up that's necessary with the patient means that actually it's all going to end up being in a single centre where the patients go to the product. And at the other end of the spectrum, you might have a situation where it just looks like a normal drug. It's mass manufactured in some remote manufacturing centre and sent out through distribution networks to hospitals where it's used normally. And there are all the different permutations in between. But even to get to those stages from a manufacturing point of view, you've obviously got to have that complemented by the associated, well, you can manufacture, but to be able to sell, you've got to have it complemented by the regulatory approvals and the reimbursement approvals. Okay, so that's basically all I was hoping to give as an introduction, to give a sense of If you can answer these 5 questions, and you can answer these 5 questions quite quickly and coherently, you grab the attention of whichever type of investor you're looking for. All other forms of valuation and transactional relationship derive from the value that is created from these basic 5 questions. If the value that you created is big enough, most other forms of transaction are possible in some way, shape or form. If the value that you've put together is not big enough, and the value is determined by a subjective analysis of the coherence of these points, then you won't get to a deal. Because if you're asking for £10 million from somebody, okay, and you haven't got a coherent argument, going back to one of the questions that's already been pointed in, which is, how much of the company should the investor get? Then actually what happens is that if the investor's putting in £10 million, they need to get £10 million worth of value. So if you're going to have something left, the value of what you created in the first place needs to be more than £10 million. I mean, it's not quite technically the same as that, because the post-money valuation is the sum of the money that's put in and the value that you created in the first place. But if you want a significant percentage, then you need to start with a very high value to begin with.
Sorry, I think that just about wraps up Matthew's talk. Thank you very much, Matthew. There's a lot for people to think about there. We'll go through the questions at the end, but so in the meantime, please do just digest on what's been covered there. See if you can answer those 5 points that Matthew mentions and try and identify how that relates to your own project. If you have any further questions about how your project fits into that, then we might be able to answer them. Pop them into the chat box and we'll see what we can do. Next up, we'll have Christelle speaking. I've already managed to introduce her twice, so I will hand over to Christelle as soon as she's got her things ready. Okay.
Hello, everybody. My name is Dr. Crystal Ruff, and today I'm going to speak with you about the top 3 things you should know about investment and funding. Let us just get the screen. There we go. In regenerative medicine. So I'm really happy that Matthew discussed these 5 points, because actually, without knowing it, I designed my talk to complement these, so it's going to fit perfectly. So it's impossible to go over all of the things that in one 10 or 15 minute talk that you want to touch on. But likewise, I have also structured mine in the top 3 things that I wish I knew when I was you. So take it back a couple of years. Oh, it's not working. There we go. So 2 or 3 years ago, I was in your position. I was a postdoc working in regenerative medicine, looking at remyelination potential of neural precursors. And very fortunately, I got exposed to the commercial side. And I was in a wonderful lab. My PI encouraged me to go off and do an MBA. So I was very fortunate. I got into one of the top business schools. I graduated and was actually selected as top 10 MBAs in the world last year for the work that I did in healthcare and the work that I did in this space. And during this time, I've been very fortunate also to be able to consult on both sides of this equation. So I've worked with mid-sized biotechs, looking at commercial strategy, looking at how they're going to commercialize their technology and what's going to happen in the next few years. And on the other side, I've also been able to work with venture capitalists, looking at advanced therapy technologies and what we're looking for in order to give money. So hopefully I can help you and put things into a little bit of perspective for you here. So let's start off with transactions and how those work. So I'm going to breeze through. I'm hoping that we've covered this in the series already. But so you've got a technology. It's a really exciting technology. You put it through the tech transfer group at your university. Typically, you'll create a spin out with your seed funding. Usually that's probably under $1 million. And then you'll expand it through clinically with Series A, Series B, etc. funding. Typically, the structure is once biotech companies get to a certain size, when it's time for marketing, when it's time for things like that they're not necessarily comfortable with, the traditional structure is that they'll exit and sell to usually a pharma, also VCs getting more and more involved here. But that's the typical structure. And throughout this, the advance button's not working. Oh, there we go. Throughout this, there are 3 key steps that I want to make sure that you're aware of, and I want to make sure that you focus on, and I wish that I knew when I was you. So the first tip is to always create a comprehensive competitive analysis and non-confidential slide package. Now, Matthew's done a great job of covering the 5 aspects that you should have when you're looking holistically at your project. I'll go into some resources that I use when I'm assessing and when I'm building this. Number 2, looking at modeling and predictive analysis. So modeling is it's a good indicator of performance, but it's a bad predictor, and we'll talk a little bit about that. The third point I want to make sure you're aware of is to reimbursement issues. Make sure that you have a technology that you can get paid for in the end. So let's move forward and look at this in a little bit more detail. So point 1. So the first thing that I do when I'm looking at any sort of technology, so when I'm either assessing it or when I'm looking to build the technology, is to create a comprehensive competitive analysis. So what does that look like? So I am advised that you've spoken about the SWOT analysis, but for those of you who don't know, this is always the first thing I do. So SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. It looks both internally and externally at things that might affect your company. So looking at the environment. So what's the competition like? What is the intellectual property like? Do you have a solid intellectual property base? Who are the major players in your field? And not just now, but 5 or 10 years from now, when you're looking at getting your product to market, what's the status going to be like? So, looking at who the key players are. So very fortunately for us, in regenerative medicine, there's what's called a high barrier to entry. So RegMed isn't some kid in the garage making an app on a Friday, like Facebook or Snapchat. Regenerative medicine and stem cell therapies take decades to do the preclinical work, and it's a very iterative process. It's very expensive to engineer the cell therapies. So it's not as if Google could come in and take this over in a second. So one of the things that you're looking at is barrier to entry. Who's in the space? Where are they compared to you? And why is your product better? So the next thing that I always do is I create a value proposition. So again, Matthew touched on this with his product and defensibility. This is a strategizer value proposition canvas. You can see in the corner strategizer, they have really good books on value proposition and business model development. And I use this canvas. So I get out Post-it notes and I create my canvas before everything that I do. And that's looking at who is your customer and what are their interests, what are their needs, what do they value. And importantly in regenerative medicine, the people using your therapy are not necessarily the people who are going to be paying for your therapy. And often these two groups have very distinct motivations. So that's something that you're going to have to keep in mind when you're doing this. And we can talk about that a little bit later. So the next thing that you're going to want to produce if you have a technology is your non-confidential slide deck. It's a technical summary of your research. I'm advised that you've already covered this in earlier sessions, so I won't do too much on it. But when I'm reading a non-confidential slide deck, so it's typically like the stuff that you would put on a poster at a conference, but structured for more business people. So also looking at the economic impact, also looking at who your market might be, considering those things that we took into account before. So the three key questions that I'm asking when I'm assessing a deck is it best in class, first in class, and can you do it? So I'm really glad this was discussed extensively earlier in the defensibility and team sections, but best in class means, is it better than everyone else? And 5 years from now when it's ready for market, is it going to be better than, say, the new fancy drug? Particularly if it's not 100% curative, particularly if, say, you have a 10% increase using this, is it going to be more cost effective than a drug that's cheap to manufacture and can give you 8%, for example? So best in class, first in class, we talked about being first to market, having the first person advantage. If you have exclusivity on a market, you can charge what you need to and make the money back early on. And the third thing, again, very importantly, can you do it? What's the team dynamic? So that's the first tip that I have for you. So make sure you have a strong understanding about what the market's like, about where you fit, and a realistic expectation of what the outcomes are going to be. So the second thing I want to talk about is we talked a little bit about healthcare modeling and economics. And while modeling is a good indicator, it's not a very good predictor. So what we see here is a Markov model. So you have different sorts of inputs, and at each key inflection point, there's a percentage that is going to come to this next inflection point, and then the next and next. You can take courses on Markov modeling. You can take courses on Monte Carlo simulation. In MBA, we use programs like At Risk or Triage, etc. You can take courses on this. But here's what you need to know, is when you look at the green and the red, input and inflection points are really where you get your value out of the models. So let's look at the next one. What I care about with modeling is what is my market and what are its key influencers? What's the projected share of the market that I might have? And we spoke about this a little bit earlier, is what happens if there's partial efficacy? What happens if this isn't a 100% cure, but a 10, 15, 20% cure? Is that still good enough? So where does this show, and why am I saying that it's the input that matters and not the output? Let's look at some predictions about the stem cell and regenerative medicine field. So here are 4 different predictions that were published recently by different groups who did modeling of the field with the different inputs putting in and et cetera. So we can see globally by 2020 it's expected to be 40 billion. The next group says 140 million. The next group says about 60 billion, and up to about 180 billion. So you see this ranges from about 150 million to 150 billion. So obviously models are not always accurate. And but what I want you to take out of this is what goes into the models that's going to shape it. So maybe one of these models had a more restrictive classification of what is regenerative medicine. Maybe one took in a different growth rate, et cetera, et cetera. And how is this affected? How is this affected by different inflection points? So also, what is it worth? So for someone, let's compare Donald Trump's hair to your average gentleman's, the worth of hair. So depending on who's paying, these private payers, Donald Trump would probably pay he probably has paid $1 billion to keep his hair, which isn't necessarily within the remit of your average person who might be on the NHS or something like that. So looking also at payers, there is a huge range of how much something's worth. So hair in one person might be worth a different amount to hair in another. What about hand function? If you're a hand function to a surgeon would be worth much more in terms of insurance and livelihood and economic impact than the hands of maybe someone who, like a footballer or someone who didn't use their hands as much. So all of these different inputs, and if I put the value for Donald Trump in, when really the actual value is the value for the normal person, it could really skew my results. So what to take about this? Don't look at the outcome of the model, but look at the key inflections. So is the use of my hand versus the use of my arm worth more in the outcome than getting 10 to 15% efficacy change? And you can see what's worth more. And if the getting hand movement is worth more, you can focus on that a little bit more thoroughly. It's all about the input. So the last thing that I'm going to mention, I hope we're not running out of time, but reimbursement. Make sure that you can get paid. So we all know there's some great science out there, but it's really important as well as doing science for the impact on in the world. You can't continue to impact the world and continue to do your research if there's no funding coming in. If you can't make a profit out of your company, you're not going to be able to do the good that you want to do. So like I mentioned earlier, it's not only necessary that your product works. It's necessary that your product works better than everything else that's out there. And if you're going to charge £1 million for this product and it works 10, 15%, it works the same as a drug that's only charging 10, guess what? Or £10 per, treatment, no one's going to buy it. And the thing with regenerative medicines is, it takes tens of thousands of pounds to produce one treatment. So there's no way that they can be priced as cheaply as some of just a straight drug medication. So you need to look at where your product fits into this curve, to the future curve once it's ready for market. So let's look at some examples of cell and gene therapies that have made it to market. So here's an example, Dermagraft. So I think they're ironing this out, but each cell therapy graft costs within the thousands to make. When it had initially been proposed for market, it was classed under the same category as a plaster or a Band-Aid. And in terms of reimbursement, I think this was in Medicare. Matt, you would know this.
It was a later thing, actually.
It was later.
Yeah.
But it was later on, and it was priced. It was priced as a plaster. So the payers initially were expecting to reimburse this at, £5 a pop, and it cost $1,500 to make. So they had to really negotiate, and they had to do studies and economic health economic studies to show, well, actually, this saves you from patients going back to the hospital. And guess what? Each night in the hospital costs this. And, it can prevent amputations in this particular subsection of patients. So this is how much it costs you. So really, you can reimburse us for this extra. Looking more into reimbursement. So this is something, I think it's an ongoing discussion. But looking at the first couple of gene and cell therapies to come out, Glybera was one of the first gene therapies to be worth near $1 million. There we go, $1 million per treatment. And although it worked, it only sold one treatment. And that was after the doctor called the CEO of the insurance provider to specifically request it. And it did work on this patient, and it was successful, but because of the price tag, insurers were reluctant to pay. And it's important to keep in mind as well that we often, humans, go through different insurance providers in our lifetime. So the insurance provider that we have when we're young, when we need some of these therapies, is not necessarily the insurance provider who we're going to have later on when we're experiencing the positive effects of these. So a lot of insurance providers are saying, well, why should I pay now for something that some other insurance provider is going to enjoy the effects of? So it's an important discussion we're having. Also, ChondroSelect, cartilage repair, has also announced that it will be withdrawn from the market at late last year because of problems with selling and reimbursement. The first, an interesting pricing structure has been produced by Strimvalis, which is kind of the second big selling gene therapy, that they'll give you your money back. If it doesn't work, they'll give you your money back, and this has payers a little bit more comfortable, but it's a big discussion. So all in all, I hope this has helped you. 3 things that I think it's really important to focus on are, having this thorough understanding of the market, where you sit, and being able to communicate that, looking at modeling for the indicative capacity, but not necessarily the outcomes, and to make sure that if you start out now, that you're going to be able to be paid when you get to market. Hope that helps. Thank you very much.
Cool, great. Thank you, Christelle. That's some more good things for people to think about there, and complements Matthew's talk very nicely. I think we're gonna just have a few questions from our audience now, and there's a few have come in through the questions box. So thank you for those, guys. Something I'd just like to mention very quickly first is both of you have talked about the importance of value in the business proposition and how you can identify not only the value proposition of your own products, but then how that interacts with what's already on the market and the competition. So what it really comes down to is a question of healthcare economics, as you alluded to with the Dermograph case. The healthcare economics just simply weren't in place for that product to be properly reimbursed. But it's a very difficult thing for young startup companies to really do a proper assessment of healthcare economics. How can they know what it's going to cost them at the end of the day once they've scaled their manufacturing? How can they really deal with those issues when healthcare economics is such a complicated thing to grapple?
Yeah, it's a fair question. I think if somebody has to go through the details of the analysis, full-blown health technology assessment in order to write their business plan, they're probably not going to get off the ground. But the point that I was making, what I was describing about the need, is the size of that need really determines how much wiggle room you have to get through to reimbursement. And actually, if you have to get down to fine strokes of health technology assessment in order to be able to establish the full-blown need at this very early stage, there probably isn't enough in the whole thing to make it work anyway, because you're always going to lose value along the way. So I think you can do simple back-of-the-envelope type calculations at a very early stage that give you a sense of how many orders of magnitude your need is greater than the competition. Sorry, your product serves, how many orders of magnitude of value your product delivers that will allow you to get paid. And simple things, the easiest thing to get paid for is savings you make to the healthcare system. So if you can see that, the Strimvalis example that was just given there, that in fact you're going to save £2.5–3 million worth of treatment over the course of the lifetime of a patient, you've got a marker there. There's a product which, if you're going to save that existing healthcare cost, you've got something to play with. You should be able to come up with a product where you can get paid a decent amount of money within a £2.5 million value or whatever it is for the patient. So simple back of the envelope things like that. If you can establish a big difference, then you've got something to play with to start going forwards with, would be my and for me it all comes back to the size of the need, because the size of the need determines the size of the value that actually you're likely to get paid for in the end.
And even if I can build on that, even taking something to a cost-neutral situation, so even if currently what we paid to manage this medical situation is $1 million over the patient's lifetime, and say my product could stop that or $1 million for every year for 10 years is what would be paid over this patient's lifetime. And say that my product, if I have it, at point X, would stop $1 million per year for 10 years. That even at a cost neutral thing, that would be 10 million that I'm saving, plus the patient in question wouldn't have to go through that quality of life issue for the next 10 years. So these are all things that you can argue, even cost neutrally, this is how much my product is worth. And it might be worth also partnering along that lines with someone in business as well. We at London Business School, we ran a health technology challenge, and I know TERMIS runs a very good biotech challenge. And I don't know about you guys, but the teams who ended up winning, the ones who did the best at the end of the day, were ones that took in people from different aspects. So, you'll have a clinician, you'll have a basic researcher, you'll have someone from the business school, and people who are able to look at things from all the different perspectives tended to have a very holistic proposition and tended to do better as a team.
So just to agree with that point, Crystal, I mean, absolutely. The easiest thing to get paid for is cost savings, but a good drug delivers much more than cost savings, and the proper healthcare technology assessment will allow you to put a value on those. The UK is very good at this, and you can actually value the benefits to the healthcare of the patient and the return of and then you can talk about greater societal benefits in terms of the patient returning to work and the tax intake and all that sort of thing. And you can even go as far as societal benefits from people returning to family life, provided that you can come up with the data that supports the analysis to do that. Now, I don't think you can do that when you're first writing out your business plan, but understanding if you think there may be an opportunity for that value to be delivered, if you're actually going to go and deliver to bring this product to market, you need to think those things through at the beginning, because your clinical trial might need to be set up in such a way that it gathers that kind of data to support the price that you're trying to get from the payer in the end. And all of these things really do need to be thought through coherently at the beginning.
So I suppose just to sum up that very comprehensive answer, it's essentially around making a decision that there is a significant enough potential for positive healthcare economics to justify proceeding with the project, and that revolves around better clinical outcomes for patients and better, cheaper ways of treating. Okay, potentially not cheaper ways of treating if we're talking for cell therapies, but this ratio of cost effectiveness. So I think at the stage that you guys are at, just making sure that you have got a persuasive case for cost effectiveness or improvements on what's on the market already, even if you don't go into the sort of quantitative details of what those are. So we've had another few questions from before the seminar started, and somebody just wants to know simply who the payers are. And you've talked about this earlier, Matthew, so differentiating the difference between who the customer is, or the recipient of the therapeutic, and who the payer is. So who are the payers?
Okay, so the first point I'm going to make is about who's not a payer. And one of the things that we often come across in the development of drugs in general, but certainly in the cell and gene therapy space, is there's a lot of focus on the regulators. And the point I make is the regulators have no intention of ever paying for your product. So remember that, because if you set off to try and meet the needs of the regulator, it will not be sufficient, because there is a higher bar from the clinical and the payer community than there is. The bars are the same in things like safety, but in terms of efficacy and value for money, the bar is higher with the payer community. And who are the payers? The payers vary from place to place, but certainly if you take a single payer system, like is often seen in Europe, so the UK, for example, the payer is actually the hospital system. But even then, you can keep layering that down. So actually, within the UK, if it's a significant drug that has a high budget impact, it's likely to be taken through a healthcare technology analysis by NICE. They are effectively a representative of the payer, but they're not actually the payer. They're not the person that you're going to form the contract with. You're then going to have to go through into the hospital system, and where you end up in the hospital system will depend upon the nature of the product or service that you're bringing. So it could be the hospital, it could be a local hospital trust, it could be a region, it could be the Department of Health, depending on what it is, or it could be a specialist group that's looking at diseases. The main point being from what I'm saying here is there are multiple payers, and everybody in some way, shape or form is involved in that payer's decision. If you look at the triangle that I put in my slides, they're all payers in some way, shape or form, but the actual payer, you need to know who it is. You need to have done your research to work out those groups, and it won't be one, who will be making a payment decision, because you have to meet their needs.
I think it's also important to look at where your patient population lives. For example, the structure in the UK and Europe is very different from the structure, say, in Canada or the US, particularly the US, where there's the two major, there's Medicaid, Medicare, and then hundreds, if not thousands, of small independent insurance providers. And is that something that you're going to negotiate with each of these 100 to 1,000 of insurance providers, and how much benefit? Where is the place that you're going to get the most benefit with the least amount of effort? And that's where you really need to look at prioritizing. Yes, and like I mentioned as well, one insurer that insures you now is likely also probably not going to be the insurer that gets the benefit later. So also discussing between different insurers what that's going to look like when, how that benefit is going to be shared moving forward might need to be something that happens in the discussion later on.
Wonderful, thank you. Our next question is discussing smaller indications like orphan diseases. If you talked earlier about there might not be such a great potential for investing in small orphan diseases, but it does seem that many of the advanced therapeutics that have come to the market have been in indications with very small market potential. So why is that, and why are investors interested or not interested in rare diseases with a small population?
Okay, so
The slide for that.
if I gave the impression that I thought that rare diseases were not a good business proposition, I apologise, because that's definitely not what I was trying to say. What I was actually trying to say was that the size of the ultimate need, however you analysis, is a function of both the individual need for the individual patient and the number of patients that there are. So if you end up in a rare disease, almost by definition, the number of patients is much, much lower, and that therefore needs to be compensated by a higher value that you are delivering to those patients. Now, to answer the question about why do people go into rare diseases, I think there are 2 points I would make. One is because by definition they are unmet needs. In a lot of cases those needs are unmet. Therefore, the size of the need is very large, and a good gene therapy or cellular therapy could deliver an amazing healthcare impact. Therefore, you can deliver a lot of value there. And so if you could take a company like Alexion, for instance, who have a product which deals with a very rare enzyme, they're able to achieve prices of reaching $600,000 a year for that product. That's good business. The second part of why people go into that area is actually the regulatory structure incentivizes it. So you are able to get faster through the regulatory process more quickly, and there are certain things like orphan designations that allow you to have a monopoly for a period of time on that marketplace, which is a deliberate incentive to get people to invest in drugs in that space.
I have nothing to add to that. That was a really thorough answer.
Another question we have from Rajesh is, what's the best strategy in terms of collaboration with people? How can I approach collaborators when I need to protect the trade secrets within my company? And I suppose more broadly, what's the value of collaborating with people at an early stage?
So that's a really good question in terms of business. So there are typically two ways in which you protect your intellectual property. One is by getting a patent issued, and the other is by what's called a trade secret. So very famous Heinz ketchup, the recipe for Coca-Cola, those are all trade secrets. So they've never filed a patent. And this is because when you file a patent, you have to list everything you've done. So they would have to list the composition, and other people could copy it. So likewise for intellectual property, if you have something that's, that's you want to protect it, but you think that a patent might put at risk the idea, you can choose to have a trade secret. Now that's very difficult. I mean, often it's taken by having very, very punitive contracts signed. So if this ever gets released, you have a very punitive outcome. It's difficult when you're looking at scientific things, because I think that trade secrets aren't necessarily very often used in science. Like they're more in other sorts of industries. The benefit of a good collaboration is you get a cross-functional team and you get lots of different perspectives. So like I mentioned about the people who do successfully in the business competitions have a cross-functional team, but it does mean that you have to share some of your interests and information. There's non-confidential information, and then there's also non-disclosure agreements that you can sign for confidential information. But with a trade secret, there is less protection than with a patent. I've found that working with networks always speeds up the process, and you get involved even for the professional aspect of knowing a lot of people in your field and of having contacts that you can access when you need it. But that's a very good question, and I don't know if there is one right answer.
Okay, just to add a couple of points on that. So collaboration is great. Think about collaboration. Collaboration is always is very, very good. But collaborations that work the best are those where there is a clear differentiation in what the partners bring to the activity, and ideally there's a clear differentiation in what they take away from the activity as well. So the classic example that I use in trying to explain this, and this comes down to intricate discussions of IP and all sorts of things, is think of an orange. Okay, if you have an orange, you could decide to share it by splitting it down the middle and give half to each person. If you do that in a collaboration, you're going to be arguing about who got the largest size of the orange, and then somebody's going to eat the orange and try and eat your bit of orange too. Much better would be to find a collaborator who wanted to make marmalade and you wanted to make orange juice. So you basically take the peel off, and they can have the peel and you can have the pith and make the orange juice. If you can find that kind of relationship in a collaboration, it's going to be much, much easier to keep that collaboration going. Now, back on the question of trade of secrets and information and how do you share. So the first thing to be is very realistic about the value and the secrecy of what you've got. And it's not the entirety of everything that you're doing that is groundbreaking and secret. Work out what it is that really needs to be kept secret. And you can enter into discussions and early stage discussions and slowly peel off the levels of information. The quicker you peel those levels off, the better the collaboration will be. But really work out what it is that you actually really, really need to keep secret and whether it really, really is unique, and keep that protected to the last. But you can still enter into discussions without endangering that.
Great, thank you. So it's basically about getting a non-disclosure agreement if necessary, but just being aware of what needs protecting, what doesn't, and trying to be realistic about how you can approach people. I think if you're in doubt, then it's probably best to, what is the best thing to do? If you're in doubt and you're not sure about if something does need protecting, then, what's the best thing to do? You can't tell somebody, should I not tell you about this?
Well, your university will have.
Yeah, I was going to say,
tech transfer.
most of this audience will have a technology transfer office somewhere. And you go and talk to them in the first instance. Now, sometimes you go and talk to them and they don't have the depth of expertise in the area that you're working with in order to fully assess it. So if you're not entirely comfortable with the answer, look around for other sources. In the case of the cell and gene therapy, if you're in the cell and gene therapy space and you think you've got something that is of enormous value, come and talk to us. That's part of what we do, is try and help people understand the value of what they've got. But go to your technology transfer office first, because they're often very, very good and they will spot these things.
I agree with that. So definitely tech transfer. I know you've had a previous session with McKenna Roberts as well. So, reach out to her. But in the cell and gene therapy space, I would first start with tech transfer at the university, because they've probably done some sort of similar thing before, and they'll be able to tell you if they can't help you. And also, that's why the cell and gene therapy Catapult is here. It does very well with that.
Cool, great. The other thing that I would say is, if you are in the competition and you've made it through to round 2, ask your mentor. So once you've been introduced to your mentor, then they will be able to help you with that kind of information as well. So that, along with your TTO, that should give you a pretty good place to start. So finally, if somebody is developing a platform technology which could have application across a lot of different areas, then is there a need to really understand where the platform might be useful, or would that distract from focusing on the value of the platform? And there's a slightly different kind of value dynamic with a platform as opposed to a therapeutic or something that's directly sold to a healthcare provider. So how can you navigate that concept of value for a platform that enables other technologies?
So my approach to this is that the problem with platforms is that if you try to do all the valuation of all the different things they could possibly do, you end up going mad trying to gather all the data together. So the key is to find an application of the platform which is clearly of high value, is clearly addressing a high value unmet need in a way that, going back to Crystal and I's point, in a way that you can get paid for, and value that in some way, shape or form. In the past, I've then gone to the second and third applications of the platform and thrown those in as well to get so all values and going back to my 5 points at the beginning. If you do a value on a spreadsheet and you create that value and you say this is what it's worth, anybody that's looking at and interpreting that spreadsheet will then apply a discount factor in their own minds to your value. And whether that's a positive or a negative discount factor will depend largely upon the validity of your arguments and the coherence between the 5 points that I presented. And so the way that you capture the value in the rest of the platform is by describing the multiplicity of options that are there for using it going forwards to capture people's imagination. And they can say, oh, well, this is not just a one-trick pony. This is something that could go in lots and lots of different directions. And they will ascribe a greater value, a greater multiplier to the overall value of what you're doing, would be my approach.
And so just to build on that as well, when I heard that question, I immediately thought of, in terms of platform technologies, there are probably 2 ways you'd go about commercializing those and selling them. So either what you do, and I'm thinking, because one of the clients I'm working with is in the artificial intelligence space, and there's this company with another competitor, and it's they've had to differentiate themselves differently. So the one competitor is offering the platform, so licensing it out. So here's my platform, everyone take it, try it, see if it fits your needs, right? The platform is a block and model, it's the same block, everyone gets the same block, and see what happens. And the other way to go about that, if you have a platform technology, is to do a spoken wheel sort of technology. So to choose one, so as Matt was saying, the most cost-effective, I guess the most promising application for it, and do it really well start to finish. And keep that in-house, and then sell the outcome of that. And then, when that becomes successful and that does really well, make another spoke and go to the second most effective way to do this. And I mean, both of those models work. And, really a platform technology is a great thing. I have a mentor, and I was speaking to him after I graduated MBA, and I was asking him, can you give me your best advice? What's your best advice? And he said to me, Crystal, if you look at the car over all these years, so when Henry Ford first made the automobile to now, it's changed a lot. It's more aerodynamic, it's faster, it's stronger, the engine's bigger. But the one thing that stayed the same is that every car has wheels. And he said, Crystal, be the one making the wheels. And likewise, that's what the platform technology is. It's the wheels for whatever you're going to use later. So, keep making those wheels. That's a good job.
Some fantastic analogies there. Thank you both. I should just say, if you do have any more questions that you haven't typed in, please just unmute yourself and speak to our panel, which you can do directly. You don't have to use me as your question mediation platform. But otherwise, please do that now or forever hold your peace, because I think we're going to be wrapping up fairly soon. No, I think they've messaged in their questions. All right, excellent. So in that case, it just remains for me to thank you both again for taking the time and providing our lovely audience with some excellent things to think about. I'm sure it'll help them very much with their companies, and we will make sure that these slides are available to you for later consultation, and will we have the recording online sometime as well? We will, so you can listen to us all again if you so wish. Lucky you. So thank you very much, guys. That's the end of our PAP session 5. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope to see you all in Davos in July. All right. Bye.
Good luck,
Bye.
everybody.